Right now, there are over 8 billion humans on this planet. Cities, countries, satellites in orbit, all of it. But there was a moment, not that long ago in evolutionary terms, when every single one of those 8 billion people almost didn't exist. Here's the number that should stop you cold. Some researchers estimate our entire species once shrank down to as few as 1,000 breeding individuals. Not 1,000 tribes. 1,000 people, total, standing between the human race and complete extinction. Stay with me because this gets bleaker before it gets hopeful. This isn't a myth or an exaggeration for views. It's written directly into your DNA, and scientists are still piecing together exactly what almost wiped us out. The question is, what nearly ended the human story before it really began, and how did we claw our way back from the edge? Let's go back to the beginning of this particular nightmare because the story starts with a mountain. Around 74,000 years ago, a volcano called Toba on the island of Sumatra erupted with a force almost impossible to picture. Geologists classify it as a supervolcanic eruption, one of the largest in the last 2 million years. It didn't just destroy the region around it. It threw an estimated 2,800 cubic kilometers of ash and debris into the atmosphere. Think about that. Enough material to bury an entire country under meters of ash. To put the scale in perspective, geologists estimate Toba released roughly 1,000 times more material than Mount St. Helens did in 1980. Ash from the eruption has been found as far away as the Arabian Sea and even in sediment layers across India, thousands of kilometers from Sumatra. This wasn't a regional disaster. It was a planetary one. But here's the thing. The real damage wasn't the eruption itself. It was what came after. That much ash and sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere blocked sunlight on a global scale. Some researchers argue global temperatures dropped by several degrees for years afterward, triggering what's sometimes called a volcanic winter. Crops failed. Food chains collapsed. Entire ecosystems that early humans depended on for survival simply stopped functioning the way they always had. That's not a bad season. That's the sky turning against you for years at a time. Here's what makes this so important. Around this exact same period, geneticists studying human DNA found something strange. When they compared genetic diversity across the entire human species, they found astonishingly little variation, especially compared to other great apes. Chimpanzees living in a single forest today often show more genetic diversity than all 8 billion humans on Earth combined. That's not a coincidence. That's the genetic signature of a population that nearly vanished. Researchers call this a genetic bottleneck, a moment where a population crashes so hard that only a small surviving group passes their DNA forward, permanently narrowing the genetic pool for every generation after. Scientists first noticed clues to this bottleneck decades ago while studying mitochondrial DNA, the genetic material passed down only through mothers. Every strand of human mitochondrial DNA alive today traces back to a surprisingly small, surprisingly recent set of maternal lines, far more recent and far more narrow than you'd expect from a species with a population in the millions at the time. But here's the problem scientists still argue about. Did the Toba eruption actually cause this crash, or did humanity's numbers already happen to be crashing around the same time for other reasons, and the timing is just a coincidence? Some researchers point to archaeological sites in Africa, like Pinnacle Point, where evidence shows continuous human occupation right through the Toba eruption, seemingly unaffected. That's a real complication for the theory. If Toba nearly wiped us out, why does the evidence show some groups just kept going like nothing happened? The current thinking is more nuanced than a single catastrophic event. Climate instability was already building before Toba erupted, part of a longer, harsher glacial period. The eruption may have been less a single killing blow and more a brutal final push during an already fragile stretch for the species, hitting some populations far harder than others depending on where they lived. Either way, the genetic evidence doesn't lie. Something, somewhere, brought humanity down to a population size that today would fit inside a single large stadium. Picture that for a second. The entire future of the human race, once small enough to seat in a football arena. So how did we survive it all? This is where the story shifts from bleak to almost unbelievable, because the answer isn't about strength or luck. It's about behavior. Researchers studying this period point to a specific cluster of changes in the archaeological record right around this bottleneck window. Signs of symbolic thinking. Deliberate body decoration. More sophisticated tools. Evidence of long-distance trade networks between separated groups, exchanging materials and, more importantly, exchanging people. Here's the pivot. A population that small should have collapsed from inbreeding alone within a few generations. The fact that it didn't suggest something remarkable was happening. Small, scattered groups of humans were actively finding each other, sharing mates, sharing knowledge, sharing resources across dangerous, unfamiliar distances. That's not luck. That's cooperation, functioning as a literal survival technology. Archaeologists have traced obsidian tools and ochre pigments found hundreds of kilometers from their known source sites during this exact window, physical proof that these small, isolated bands weren't staying put. They were walking impossible distances, through unfamiliar and often hostile terrain, to reach other humans they'd likely never met, carrying goods that had no survival value on their own except as a reason to make contact. Think about what that means. The instinct to connect with strangers, to trade, to form alliances beyond your immediate group, might be one of the exact traits that pulled our entire species back from the edge of extinction. Fast forward tens of thousands of years, and the population that clawed its way back from that bottleneck didn't just recover. It exploded. From roughly 10,000 breeding individuals at our lowest point, humans spread across every continent except Antarctica, adapted to deserts, ice sheets, rainforests, and mountain ranges, and eventually built the 8 billion person civilization you're living in right now. Here's the reveal that should genuinely unsettle you. Every single human alive today, every ethnicity, every culture, every language descends from that same small surviving population. We are, genetically speaking, an unusually uniform species, precisely because we almost didn't make it. That's why identical twins on opposite ends of the planet are, genetically, closer to being extended family than most other species populations are to each other at all. Compare that to something like fruit flies or common house sparrows, species with populations in the millions that never crashed the way ours did. Their genetic diversity generation to generation dwarfs our own. We are, in a very real sense, the descendants of survivors, all of us, still carrying the narrow genetic signature of a near miss. So here's the full picture. A supervolcano erupts on the other side of the world for most humans, and possibly plunges the planet into a years-long volcanic winter. Somewhere in that chaos, or somewhere close to it, human numbers crash to a population small enough to lose in the woods. Small, scattered survivors, instead of turning inward, start reaching outward, trading, connecting, mixing their genes across dangerous distances. And that single behavior, cooperation with strangers, is very possibly the reason you exist at all. Every person you've ever met, every stranger you'll pass today, is a descendant of that same tiny surviving population, pulled back from the edge by nothing more sophisticated than people deciding to trust and rely on people they'd never met before. Here's what makes it important. Humanity's greatest weapon was never strength or speed. It was our stubborn refusal to survive alone. If you've ever wondered how fragile the whole human story really was, now you know. It came down to a number small enough to fit in a single room, and a decision, made over and over by people who had no idea they were saving the species. If this changed the way you think about every stranger you'll ever meet, you know what to do with that.